In today's video, we will be taking a look at the Spectator or the Visionary pathway. We'll be going over the full sequence system, all the known beyonders, and what's to come in the future. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more pathway videos. Let's get into it. Let's kick things off with the sequence system. As Sequence 9 Spectator, they gain 3 new abilities. The first one is Enhanced Eyesight. They can see things more clearly from further away than a normal person could. The second one is Increased Intelligence. Let's say an animal drank this potion, Susie, they now can communicate in the human language. And the third ability, simply the ability to spectate someone and discern their true thoughts or feelings based off of their body language, their facial expressions, or subconscious actions they take. So basically the ability of a spectator. Let's move on to Sequence 8. Now, Sequence 8 Telepathist is one of the worst Sequence 8s because we don't know too much about it. All we know is that they basically just gain a direct boost from Sequence 9, but not very strong. All they can do now is observe more into the mysticism side of things. So now instead of just physical things such as someone's facial expressions or their body language, they can now observe sort of their ether body and see their emotions based off of that. That's all they really get. Let's move on to Sequence 7. Now at Sequence 7, Psychiatrists, they experience a true qualitative change. They gain up to 5 new abilities. Let's start off with the 2 negative ones they can impose onto their enemies, this being Frenzy and Awe. Frenzy basically makes an opponent lose control or makes them lose their rationality, affects their mind directly. Now, this applies to only one opponent. On the other hand, Awe, this can be spread onto multiple opponents, but a bit weaker. Now, their positive ability is called Placate, one of the most popular abilities in Lord of the Mysteries, simply because of its usefulness. This can be used to calm down your allies and yourself. So let's say I'm losing control, or I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, or my ally did. I can simply calm myself down, or my ally. This works especially well if they're Sequence 9 or 8, or if they're simply not a Beyonder at all. And then they gain psychological cues as well. The ability to sort of direct the opponent to think how you want them to think through psychological cues and the ability to speak, basically persuasion technique. Now, Sequence 6 Hypnotist is one of the most underrated Sequence 6s because, well, they gain the ability to hypnotize people. And they can use this ability in the heart of battle. By simply, well, using this ability, the opponent can make decisions they wouldn't usually make and sort of harm themselves or their allies, right? And of course, they also gain psychological invisibility. Also one of the most popular and most used abilities in Lord of the Mysteries. We see spectators use this all the time because their physical stats aren't that good. Let's move on to one of the most mediocre Sequence 5s in the series, Dreamwalker. Now, in my opinion, Dreamwalker isn't that great because they only gain 3 new abilities and those 3 abilities simply aren't that good. The first one is Guidance. They simply guide the opponents in their dreams to reveal their deepest, darkest secrets to them. Now, this is, I guess, okay for learning information. The second ability they get is Alteration. They alter the way the opponent thinks over a long period of time. The key word here is long period of time. By the time they can do anything qualitative, they could have simply done it in a different way. So in my opinion, not that strong. The third ability they get is Dream World Traversal. Now this one is pretty decent. They can travel through people's dreams. So decent Sequence 5, not too great, not too bad, but Sequence 4 is crazy, so let's get into that. Let's move on to Sequence 4 Manipulator, where they gain a huge boost to absolutely everything in their kit. Let's start off with their new abilities, the first one being Manipulation. Now Manipulation is as simple as it sounds. They can manipulate anyone that's not on the demigod level to doing whatever they want them to do. Very, very strong. Let's move on to the second one, which is the ability to create virtual personas. Think of it as sort of Almond's avatars, the Air Pathway's ability to create avatars. And well, let's say Audrey can use this to create multiple versions of herself that can all invade someone's heart of body and mind, all using, well, other capabilities of the Spectator pathway. And then for fights, they can use 2 different abilities. Well, they have gained 2 new ones. The first one being sort of a Mind Plague, a less noticeable ability that can be spread out across an area, and anyone who's in there for a certain amount of time, the longer, of course, the better, they get solely affected by this plague, affecting their brain, not their physical body, making them lose control eventually. Now, the second ability is a sort of more direct attack, sort of a mind storm directly onto the opponent. Very noticeable, but very, very hard to deal with. Now, once this affects the opponent, they will instantly hear thousands of voices in their head. So combining the plague on top of, well, this new ability to directly mind storm an opponent, it can be a very strong ability to make opponents lose control. Again, their improved abilities include better psychological invisibility, they can hide up to sort of angel level, hide from anyone simply even if they're right in front of them, and of course they can use their incomplete mythical creature form. Unlike every other pathway, or almost every other pathway, they can use their incomplete mythical creature form at this sequence without losing control because of their enhanced placate and other capabilities of calming themselves down. So very, very strong Sequence 4, especially being able to use your mythical creature form, which is just a massive dragon. Let's move on to Sequence 3. Now at Sequence 3 Dreamweaver, they gain sort of 3 new abilities. The first one being able to weave dreams into reality. I can put someone to sleep and make them a dream so realistic they wouldn't even realize they are in one, observing their reactions and manipulating them like a puppet in this dream, not even in real life, which is broken. The second ability they get is sort of a mix between the Plague and the Mind Storm, called Plague Storm. Basically an improved version which can even affect Sequence 2 Angels. So very strong if a Sequence 3 attack can affect a Sequence 2, especially because there's a huge boost in between those two. So very strong ability. The third thing they get is an improvement to their virtual personas. Their virtual personas can now harbor their previous identity and personality. The perfect example of this is Audrey giving her virtual persona her old personality and identity of the person, of the noble girl who didn't know anything about the truth of this world. So yeah, that's what they get as Sequence 3. Let's move on to Sequence 2. Now, unfortunately, we don't know too many things about Sequence 2 Discerner. We do know that they gain the ability to discern the opponent's deepest, darkest fears. So let's say I'm facing off against a Sequence 2. They now know my fear, let's say, of spiders, and can use their various different abilities to create a bunch of spiders in my room, which will cause me to lose control. Pretty simple, but very strong ability. Let's move on to Sequence 1. Let's move on to Sequence 1. Luckily, we do see quite a bit of this sequence because of Adam and 008. The first ability they get is, well, meta-awareness. The more you know about them, the more they know about you. Now, the more they know about you, the better they can prophesize about you, which is their second ability. They can write down anything, and that will conjure into real life. Now, this does have its limitations, which I'll explain in a second. But let's give an example of this with 008 sending down a meteorite shower onto Klein. That is ridiculous and very scary, and was very scary for Klein. Now the limitation is also showcased in this, because that meteor shower was going to fall onto Earth regardless. 008 simply affected when it was going to land and where it was going to land onto Klein. So you can't create two illogical things, or you could, but it will exhaust a lot of your spirituality. Everything has to be within sort of reasoning. So you do have to have quite a bit of intelligence to be able to use this sequence. But overall very strong, more meant for sideline fighting rather than direct confrontations, and can be used to even affect entire world wars as we see Adam use. Let's move on to Sequence 0. Finally, let's move on to Sequence 0 Visionary. They only gain one new ability that we know of, which is envisioning. Envisioning is absolutely mind-blowing though, so let me explain it to you. So basically, I can envision my two Beyonder characteristics within me, Sequence 1s, and give away two of my, well, Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics to virtual personas. Those virtual personas with their own identities and personalities by now can also use the author's abilities, so we can, all three of us can create coincidences for different people, etc. Basically tripling my productivity. Now, the next ability they get is the ability to envision a divine kingdom. We see Adam do this with the Corpse Cathedral. Now the Corpse Cathedral can even resist other Sequence 0's attacks and is very durable and can keep someone in there permanently without them being able to do anything, especially if they're anything below Sequence 0. And lastly, and the strongest ability in my opinion, is the ability to envision, well, their stories. The stories that they got as Sequence 1 author can now be envisioned and be even stronger, and can affect Sequence 1s and anyone below that. Basically, anyone that's Sequence 1 and below that doesn't have the help of a Sequence 0 will fall into your story and be affected by your story, whether that's good or bad for them. That's it for the sequence system. Let's move on to a list of Beyonders. Now let's move on to a list of every Beyonder that sort of used this pathway. Now there were a bunch of Beyonders that have used this pathway, but I only want to mention two important ones. I'm sure you can already guess which two I'm going to mention because I've already made videos about both of them. The first one being Audrey Hall. Of course, she's the most dazzling gem of Backlund, and she gives us sort of all the breakdown, everything we know because of her. So Sequence 9, we saw her go through all the sequences sort of step by step and seen her grow into a demigod as Sequence 3 now. So very strong, showcases the ability of a Spectator perfectly to us, and is the one that gave us all this information about it. Truly the most dazzling gem of Backlund. Let's move on to Adam. Now Adam, of course, is literally, well, the Spectator pathway within itself. Was born as a mythical creature of the Spectator pathway, and, well, what can I say? He is literally the embodiment of it. We see him multiple times throughout the story use his, well, Sequence 1 abilities and later on Sequence 0 abilities to manipulate the events of the entire Lord of the Mysteries. We see him orchestrate the World War and do various different things, but we do also, well, see him fail sometimes, which showcases that this pathway isn't all powerful. So even though they can write stories and prophesy stories into existence, they won't always happen. Anyways, that's all for the characters. Let's move on to the history behind it and what's to come in the future. Now let's speak about what's to come in the future for this pathway. Now luckily for this pathway, well, both Audrey and Adam are very involved in Circle of Inevitability. Audrey will have a major role within the next couple of chapters or volumes because she is part of the Terror Club, which will now be a central part of the story, while Adam, as half a Great Old One, is the sort of leading figure of Earth fighting back against the outer deities and the apocalypse that's to come. So there will be a lot of new content for us to see, a lot more information about Sequence 3 for Audrey, and a lot more information about Sequence 0 for Adam. Looking forward to it. And yeah, that's it for this video. Let me know what you guys thought. Let me know if everything was accurate or not, and if you liked it. And well, have a nice day everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe.